Information fueled.
Opinion driven.
This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
We talk news.
5:06, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Welcome on in. It is a Thursday, January 2nd. I'm all confused. Is it Monday? Is it Thursday? Is it Friday? It is Thursday, January 2nd. And boy, do we have a lot of news to report to you. Of course, going to talk about the two terror attacks, one in New Orleans, the other in Las Vegas. And I got to tell you, there's so much news to go over and so much news, of course, to digest as well. Let's, of course, first start in New Orleans.
The subject has been identified as 42-year-old Shamsud Dim Jabbar, a U.S.-born citizen from Texas. An ISIS flag was located on the trailer hitch of the vehicle, and the FBI is working to determine the subject's potential associations and affiliations with terrorist organizations. We are working with our partners to investigate this as an act of terrorism. We do not believe that Jabbar was solely responsible.
All right, so we've got 15 dead, dozens is injured. The terrorist, of course, as you know, was shot and killed by police. There's so many stunning things about this, and Kathy Hinters is going to join us at 6:36. But one of the things that's stunning about this case is that he was able to maneuver his truck around the barriers onto the sidewalk and then ram through this massive crowd. Friends, it is 2025. How did they manage to screw this up? It isn't hard. You put on barriers so that these kind of psychopaths can't get through those barriers through, if they don't put the barriers on the sidewalk and they can get around the barriers, you use more barriers, you put spike strips down. Bottom line is, we've been doing this and dealing with these kinds of people for a long time. So how is it possible that they allowed this guy to maneuver around the barriers? It is stunning. And then you're sitting there and you're watching. You're watching the press conference. Did you watch the press conferences? So you've got all these people, the local authorities there, and they're all making really strong statements, right? We're going to be really tough, and we're just going to make sure that the city of New Orleans gets through this. And I'm watching all of this, and I'm sitting here thinking, you people screwed up. You people made massive mistakes because you didn't have enough barriers in place. They were not strategically placed so that the guy couldn't maneuver around the barriers. Again, we've been dealing with this a long time, worldwide. So how did you not have spike strips down? How did you not have the barriers there so that he wasn't able to get around these barriers? They just left a big hole, wide open. And so it's really sad because there's a number of things that are going on, as you know. Number one, we've had a wide open border for how long? For 4 years? And so you've got President Biden out there, and President Biden is saying, oh, well, this guy, was an American citizen. Yeah. But he was radicalized somehow. And so that's what they're trying to figure out is that radicalization. By the way, Senator John Kennedy, of course, out of Louisiana, asked about other terror attacks. He had this alarming answer. I want you to listen to this. I think he was on Fox News, and he was being interviewed.
Are you getting the sense that there's any threat of any other potential attacks tonight on any other major cities?
I can't answer that. I can, but I won't.
I mean, she asked him, are there other American cities that are in peril, in danger? He says, I can answer that, but I won't, which clearly means that the answer is, of course. America is not safe. We haven't been safe since Joe Biden opened up the damn border. Now, I know that this dude was born in Texas, and he drove to New Orleans to do what he did. He also had some associates who are trying to figure that out. But President Biden agrees that this guy was inspired by ISIS, as told to him by the FBI. This is what the president said.
Indicating that he's inspired by ISIS. Expressing a desire to. The FBI also reported to me that mere hours before the attack, he posted videos on social media indicating that he's inspired by ISIS expressing a desire to kill. The ISIS flag was found in his vehicle, which he rented to conduct this attack.
So one of the things that a lot of people are saying, and Donald Trump had a long post. Let me read the Donald Trump post real quick, because it is pure Trump. Our country is a disaster, a laughingstock all over the world. This is what happens when you have open borders with weak, ineffective, and virtually non-existent leadership. The DOJ, FBI, and Democrat state and local prosecutors have not done their job. They are incompetent and corrupt, having spent all of their waking hours unlawfully attacking their political opponent, me, rather than focusing on protecting Americans from the outside and inside violent scum that has infiltrated all aspects of our government and our nation itself. Democrats should be ashamed of themselves for allowing this to happen to our country. He says the CIA must get involved now before it's too late. The USA is breaking down. A violent erosion of safety, national security, and democracy is taking place all across our nation. Only strength and powerful leadership will make it stop. See you on January 20th. Make America great again. So people are trying to say, and this is what stuns me. Are people really this dumb? So people are actually saying that Trump and people who are screaming, well, it's the open border, are wrong because this guy was homegrown, if you will. Anybody remember this story? Because here's the deal. We don't know this guy's journey to radicalization. We're going to get into that as the program continues to unfold. But anybody remember this story? 8 suspected terrorists with ties to ISIS arrested in Philadelphia, New York City, and Los Angeles in FBI sting operation. Remember that story? These guys were from Tajikistan. They were nationals with ties to ISIS. They were arrested in those 3 major cities after coming across our southern border. So how do we know? Because these are just the 8 that we caught. And I guarantee you that of the millions of people that have come across our southern border, there's a lot of them there, here in America now, that are trying to radicalize people just like Shamsud Dim Jabbar, the killer in New Orleans. So when you leave and this is what I would say to Joe Biden, obviously, and anybody who is trying to defend his wide open border by saying, well, the border has nothing to do with what happened in New Orleans because the guy was from here. How do you know how he was radicalized? How do you know how he was radicalized? How do you know that he wasn't radicalized by somebody who came across our southern border? We also need to know what the hell is going on in that mosque that was within walking distance of his home. And by the way, have you heard about this dude's home? We'll get into that as well. All 8 of those suspects that we talked about way back when, this was a few months ago, crossed the U.S. border illegally. Fox News saying the suspects were allowed into the U.S. pending asylum after being fully vetted. They were fully vetted and they were let into this country, even though they had ties to ISIS. It wasn't until they were released that authorities flagged them for having ties to the terror group. So in other words, yeah, this guy, Shamsud Dim Jabbar, was born in Texas and he drove to New Orleans to do what he did. That doesn't absolve the wide open southern border because this guy's radicalization very well could have come from across our wide open southern border. We don't know how he was radicalized. Here's what we do know. What we do know is we don't know what the hell's come across our southern border. Do we? No. So we don't know how many Shamsud Dim Jabbars there are out there. And let me ask you this other question. Do you think people really care whether or not this was a guy who was radicalized here in this country or was radicalized in another country and came across our open border? No. there's a lot to this. And so they're trying to figure out how dude was radicalized. You got to look at two things. You got to look at the wide open border. You've got to look at that mosque. Details straight ahead, 5:16. Time to check the roads on WTN.
Eastbound at Donaldson Pike, exit 216B, and other way around the Nashville area, wide open, no traffic to report right now. Traffic every 10 minutes every morning on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff gets to do traffic today. And apparently, he's not quite used to.
That's what threw me off. I was expecting you to. I don't know why. I was expecting. You launched the tease for news. I was thinking you were going to launch traffic for some reason.
No, man, that's you.
That's okay. Me. Totally me.
Listen, here's the great news. It's like January 2nd, and while there's a lot of news going on, no pressure because there's not going to be a lot of traffic today. Yeah. So you're all good. And Joan's from home today. So if Joan is there, Joan's from home today.
I'm so totally here in my pajamas.
Are you in your pajamas?
So jealous of that.
Yeah.
That was like me the other day. I was in my pajamas and my fuzzy slippers.
Yeah, it's the best.
And I can guarantee you the coffee is a lot better at Joan's house.
It certainly is.
All right, so we'll get into all of that and a whole lot more straight ahead on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. So here's part of what's bizarre. Because there's so many things. Whenever these things happen, and by the way, just so you know, of course, I do know what happened in Las Vegas as well. I'm going to get into all of that. Matthew Leivelsberger is said to be, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but he is the guy that drove the Tesla truck in front of the Trump Tower in Las Vegas and exploded it. Of course, he is now dead. He drove from Colorado Springs apparently to Las Vegas to do that. And they both used that Turo app. And apparently it turns out now they both also served at the same military base because both of these guys served in the military. See what I mean? There is a lot to these stories. And so there is a lot to cover. Here's what was bizarre. Because again, there's a lot of very bizarre things. The FBI initially said that this was not a terror attack.
This is not a terrorist event. What it is right now is they're improvised explosive devices.
What the hell is it? They knew that there was an ISIS flag on the dude's truck in New Orleans. They knew it. When the FBI said
this is not a terrorist event,
they had already seen the ISIS flag on the back of his car, on the back of that pickup truck. So why would they say that? They've got this sort of reflexive thing where it's like, oh God, if we admit that it's a terrorist attack, then we've got to start looking at the fact that it's radical Islam. We've got to start talking about the wide open border, and we've got to save radical Islamic terrorism and the wide open border at all costs. And that leads them to say some really absurd things.
This is not a terrorist event.
All right. And so then ultimately the FBI starts looking really, really foolish. Because, yeah, there was an ISIS flag strapped to the truck, to the back of the truck. And this type of attack is very emblematic of a typical ISIS attack. We see these kinds of things all the time, which is why when I opened up this morning, I'm asking the question, how the hell did they not have that street protected with barriers? I think they call them Jersey barriers. And if you watch the coverage, the guy was able to maneuver around the Jersey barriers onto the sidewalk and plows into that large group of people. So they didn't have enough Jersey barriers, or they should have put down spike strips to protect all of those people. So clearly there were a lot of mistakes made. And these kind of mistakes, I mean, you look back on, okay, so who knew what? Was this guy on the radar? And I don't know if he was on the radar or not. I'm going to try to find that out here because I have not seen anything right now that shows that this guy, Jabbar, was on the FBI's radar. A lot of people asking the question, was the FBI so incredibly focused on January 6th? When the reality is that most of those folks, misdemeanors at best, and something that happened years ago. And so now is their eye off the ball when it comes to terrorism here in our country. Real terrorism by real bad guys. It is 5:21 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. By the way, the Super Text line is open. We'd love to hear from you. 615-737-9986. 615-737-WWTN. It is 5:22 on Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7. Joan Jones is not in the dust-encrusted WTN newsroom. She's at home with better coffee in her PJs. Joan, what's coming up?
Yeah, we'll tell you the link or two that were discovered between those two terror attacks on New Year's Day, and also why officials think there may have been something sinister about the downing of a South Korean jet. We've got those stories coming up at 5:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.